Today we're going to find out just how far a full map of every tier 2 tower can get in Bloons Tower Defense 5. And if you've already seen my tier 1 video, I'd like for you to predict which tower you think will end up getting the most from its tier 2 upgrades. Now, starting off with the Dart Monkey, I'm honestly not expecting to get all that huge of an improvement, and the reason I say this is because they actually tied for the lowest overall improvement during the tier 1 video, at least out of any tower that could improve, which is really pertinent considering that the Dart Monkey's tier 2 upgrades do the exact same thing as the tier 1s, increasing the range with the left path and bringing the pierce up by 1 with the right path. You probably also noticed that I included all the specialist building perks on the screen, which I'm not going to bother saying since I already went through all of them in the tier 1 video, but they will be there every time I show the tier 2 upgrades in case you want the reminder. But honestly, I don't think this tower is going to really get the shine until we start getting to use tier 3 upgrades, specifically on the right path, the triple darts, because I know those are definitely quite powerful. But in any case, here's how I'm going to do things moving forward. If a tower already got past round 85 as a tier 1, that's where I'll begin the full map of tier 2s, because round 86 is where true free play begins, which means that you start facing a random combination of ceramics, Moabs, BFBs, and ZOMGs. Beyond that, the Moab class balloons gain extra speed and health every single round past the 85 point as well, while the non-Moab class balloons simply gain extra speed. So with that in mind, how far into free play can our army of tier 2 Dart Monkeys get? Oh, and one last thing, I debated this with myself for a little bit, but since I did use a 0-3 village with enhanced range for both a full map of each 0-0 and 1-1 tower, it's only fair that I continue using it here, since the tier 1 upgrade does give every tower in the village's range 1 extra pierce, which could have a really huge effect on the Dart Monkey that only has 3 pierce as a tier 2 tower. That is totally my fault for not getting rid of the village once we were past round 82 in the previous videos, since that is the last round where you have to face camo balloons, and that's the whole point of the village, was to make sure that our low tier towers could pop lead and camo balloons, but I really do hope that you can understand. Now honestly, the tier 2 Dart Monkeys were actually doing quite well in the early free play rounds, which was definitely impressive considering that as a tier 1 tower, they only got to round 100 in total. However, this army had no problem getting past that point, and I think that honestly, the extra range is doing them a big favor because it seems like now that a ton of Dart Monkeys are able to consistently attack the balloons around them. And they continued surviving through some really difficult rounds, ultimately not failing for the first time until round 107, where you can see the Dart Monkeys had to face nearly 1.2 million RBE, which included an incredibly huge amount of BFBs mixed with some ZOMGs, which is why the defense simply could not keep up. And if you aren't aware, I actually give every tower that makes it into free play 3 attempts since these rounds are random, that way they won't unfairly lose early to an unlucky try. And sure enough, on our second attempt, round 107 was substantially easier, and then on round 108, the Dart Monkeys actually survived nearly 1 million RBE, which I thought was going to be their limit, until they proved me totally wrong, by also surviving the even more intense waves of balloons on round 109, and then on round 110, the RBE got higher once again. But somehow, our Dart Monkeys kept on pushing through, which was actually quite shocking to me, given how huge this wave of ZOMGs at the end was. But they did nearly lose 300 lives, so it's a real good thing that I have my Monkey Knowledge Laboratory maxed out. And as you can see, round 111 was even crazier than anything that had come before, and it proved to be too much for our Dart Monkey army on their second try. And on our final attempt, we ended up getting lucky that round 111 was actually easy enough to get through, but round 112 ended up proving to be more than enough to crush our Dart Monkeys once and for all. But that marks a 12 round improvement from tier 1 to tier 2, which definitely exceeded my expectations. And up next we have got the Tack shooter, which I think should also be able to make a pretty solid improvement, especially based on what I just saw with the Dart Monkey, because the Tack shooter already jumped 7 rounds from a tier 0 to a tier 1, and the thing is, its tier 2 upgrades also do the same thing as the tier 1s, just like with the Dart Monkey. That being, the left path increases the firing speed of the Tack shooter, while the right path increases its range. Now I just want to quickly say, if you end up enjoying this video, a lot of effort goes into making them possible. I mean, here's what the editing looked like for the tier 1 video I made, so dropping a like and sub really does go a long way to help the content reach more people. But with that being said, let's see what our army of Tack shooters is going to be capable of. Of course, the early free play rounds were absolutely no problem for them, as the balloons were basically never even making it past the first 2 inner loops of the track as we approached the round 100 mark. And unlike the Dart Monkey, even as we had surpassed it, the Tack shooters continued to easily tear through all the balloons without any trouble. and pretty soon they had gotten past round 107, which of course is where the dart monkey had failed for the first time, but beyond that, they kept on pushing past round 12, where it ultimately failed on its third try as well. And beyond that, they still weren't struggling, despite the RBE consistently now being over 1 million, and the Moab class balloons being quite fast and strong. And I was pretty amazed when they survived a record 1.4 million RBE on round 117, which is already quite the improvement compared to their tier 1 counterparts. And ultimately, the Tack shooter didn't end up failing until round 120 for the first time, which was actually quite interesting, considering that this round had a considerably lower RBE than 117 had, which shows that the actual makeup of all the balloons also plays a huge role. Now on the second try, they actually clutched up pretty early during round 120, and only lost 2 lives when the ceramics got super close to the exit, and then they were able to keep pushing forward up until round 123, where the Tack shooter just barely couldn't keep up with all the ceramic balloons. And now on their final attempt, round 123 was actually a good bit easier, allowing us to get through it pretty easily, but then round 124 brought things back to reality, where the Tack shooters once again just barely lost to some fleeting ceramics. So that marks a really solid 17 round improvement compared to the tier 1s. The sniper should also have some solid potential as well, as its tier 2 upgrade on the left path will bring its total damage per shot from 5 all the way up to 8, although the right path upgrade will have no effect since it just allows the sniper to attack camo balloons, which you don't face past free play anyways. Now it's also nice how this tower actually has a distinct visual cue for both of its tier 2 upgrades, making it a lot easier for me to make sure every single tower is getting upgraded to exactly a 2-2 tower. And now let's see if 8 damage per shot will actually be enough to set a new record. Of course, the first rounds of free play were an absolute joke, and it's always funny to me watching the ZOMGs just basically disappear one by one when you use this tower, and they continue tearing through the game as we surpass the round 100 mark. But all of a sudden, it popped into my head that I didn't remember to actually enable this tower's specialist building, and sure enough, when I checked on the game, the snipers were about to lose to just round 109. So I quit out and switched from the Tack shooters building over to the snipers, which definitely makes a noticeable difference in how well this tower can handle all the balloons. And from there, the snipers kept on pushing. But I could tell that on round 115, when they just barely survived all these ceramics at the end, that this run wasn't going to be lasting much longer. And sure enough, just one round later, they ended up getting overran by the Bloons for the first time. Now on their second attempt, the snipers got lucky with a much easier round 116, which they easily handled, but round 117 brought the difficulty back up, and honestly, they were getting really close to surviving, but just a few ceramics ended up escaping during the round. And on their third try, the same thing happened as their second, in that round 117 was now a lot easier than it had been, allowing them to reach 118, where the snipers failed to all the ZOMGs that the game was throwing our way. But as several of you have pointed out, the sniper could really benefit if I tried changing the targeting on some of them. Now I won't pretend to be an expert on this, but my thinking is that by changing some of the snipers over to strong, we will be able to pop the ZOMGs much more quickly, and ideally, if I still leave a good portion of the snipers on first, we won't get overran by all the weaker balloons that result from these ZOMGs getting destroyed. Also, I just noticed that the snipers at the top of the map have tens of thousands of pops, while the snipers at the bottom sometimes have less than 100, so I guess the game has its own hidden targeting system based on the sniper's Y coordinate. But in any case, I started round 118 with all these snipers having been switched, and at first it was going well, with the ZOMGs getting cleared out fast. But keep in mind, the snipers got pretty lucky with an easier round this time than the one that they had failed to before, and yet, by not having every sniper targeted to first, they ended up getting overran towards the end of the round with nothing but BFBs remaining. And this is actually why I didn't bother changing their targeting during the tier 0 and tier 1 videos, because the low tier snipers always lose to getting overran by ceramics, so I figure they need all their firepower to be focused on first. But that's still a pretty respectable 11 round improvement for the tier 2s, and I'm glad that I could try out a popular suggestion from my comments as well, although of course if I didn't do the targeting right, please feel free to let me know. Now I would be lying if I said I was super confident in the Boomerang monkey, as they didn't get all that far as tier 1 towers, and the thing is, their right path tier 2 upgrade only allows them to pop leads, which is just as useful as the sniper's camo detection upgrade was, so we're entirely relying on the glaive upgrade you get from the left path to make this tower finally good. Now the game says that the glaives are sharper, faster, and bigger than the regular Boomerang, which hopefully means they have a higher pierce and allow the Boomerang to launch more attacks per minute. And at first, things were actually looking pretty good. The Boomerangs were shredding through the early free play rounds quite easily, and honestly, it seemed like maybe the glaive upgrade would be the difference maker after all. In fact, when we got to round 100, a few Boomerangs hadn't even had to start fighting yet, which I thought was a really good sign considering the tier 1 Boomerang had failed at just round 97. But then, things quickly changed, like immediately changed, as the Bloons on round 100 began to overwhelm our defenses, and a large group of ceramics ended up taking them out. So yeah, I guess I was right to not be so confident in this tower after all. Now on our second try, the Boomerang was able to get past round 100, and at least it did continue surviving for a little while longer as well. In fact, they actually clutched up on round 104 when the ceramics were about to escape, but instead, we only leaked about 70 lives. And then again on round 105, they just barely caught a group of ceramics in time for us to not entirely lose, which allowed them to ultimately reach round 106 on their second attempt, and you can see that it's always a bunch of ceramic Bloons that managed to get through. And sure enough, on our third try, it was the same story, although you can see quite a few ZOMGs were also still on the map this time. And at least the Boomerang saved itself from total embarrassment by ultimately improving by 9 rounds as a tier 2 instead of just 3. But the Ninja Monkey should have a lot more potential, as its left path upgrade will increase the pierce of its shurikens up to 4, while the right path upgrade gives each shuriken a chance of sending any Bloon up to a ceramic back towards the entrance of the map upon hitting it. So this tower should have a much lower chance of getting overwhelmed by ceramics than the others have so far. Now I don't think the Shadow Ninja ability that they get from their specialist building will be very helpful at this point, as it only creates a 0-0 clone of each ninja when you're using them, and the effectiveness of that naturally goes down with each of these videos that I make. But I definitely am excited to see how much we get from the tier 2 upgrades themselves, and sure enough, the early free play rounds stood absolutely no chance. But what I found particularly enjoyable to see was the way that the ceramics basically never even had a chance to progress past the Moab class balloons. As soon as they respawned, they'd be sent flying back and then destroyed by all the shurikens that they have to pass by. Beyond that, the ninja was already very solid as a tier 1 tower, so I wasn't surprised when they easily cruised past the round 100 mark. But what I did find impressive is that as we continued pushing forward, this entire right area of the map still wasn't having to engage in the battle at all, meaning the Bloons are being entirely contained to the first 2 squares of the map, at least for the most part. And at this point, they've made it further than the tier 1 towers did without even breaking a sweat. So I really wasn't shocked when the ninja kept on pushing forward, managing to get all the way up to round 121 when some Moabs made it too far to be destroyed in time. Although I won't count this as their first loss since I wasn't using the Shadow Ninja ability yet. However, once I did, my point about their effectiveness diminishing was very quickly proven, as we still got overran on just round 122. Now on our second try, we did survive round 122, but it was only because the round itself was easier, although we did also survive on round 123 when the RBE ramped back up. However, there was absolutely no chance of getting past the insanity that was round 124. But I was thinking that it might help to slow down the game in case fast forward mode is somehow affecting the ninjas, so that's what I did for round 125 on my third attempt, but we still ended up losing to it regardless. So it would seem that the ninja and Tack shooter are tied for our largest improvement thus far, with 17 rounds compared to their tier 1s. And honestly, I think the bomb tower might have a chance to beat that record. I don't want to overestimate it, but the tier 2 upgrade on the left path gives us frag bombs, which allows each bomb to release 8 additional projectiles upon exploding, and I'm thinking this is going to be insanely powerful against the Moab class balloons in particular. Beyond that, the right path upgrade turns said bomb into a missile, which is significantly faster and actually allows the activated ability that the bomb tower gets from its specialist building to be more effective. That's because this ability will briefly double the range of the bomb tower, and the regular bomb can be too slow to take full advantage of that compared to the missile. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see what our army of bomb towers is going to be capable of. Of course, it goes without saying that they were easily destroying the early rounds of free play, especially considering that the tier 1 bomb towers already got up to round 109. But the really crazy thing is that even as we approached that mark with our tier 2 army, we still had a significant amount of bomb towers that hadn't even engaged in the battle yet, and thus, they continued easily pushing forward. And like I had originally expected, it really seems as though the frag bomb upgrade is making a significant difference here. However, I was wrong to think that the bomb tower would set a new record for improvement, as it ended up getting overwhelmed by an insane amount of Bloons on round 122. Now, since I wasn't using their activated ability, I won't count this as one of their fails, but the interesting thing is, when I did use it on our next attempt, we actually had to face a very similar amount of RBE, and the bomb towers ended up still failing despite me using the abilities, which completely throws my idea out of the window from before, where I was saying that this ability would be more powerful since we have a faster projectile now. I guess that the balloons themselves being so much faster at this point really offsets the value that you get from them. And when we got into our second attempt, the round still had an RBE of over 1.4 million, which definitely seems like particularly bad luck, and sure enough, we failed to it once again. Now finally on our third attempt, we only had to face 1.1 million RBE, which the bomb towers were able to defeat. However, on round 123, they ultimately got overwhelmed once more. So the tier 2 bombs ended up with a 14 round improvement, which is still pretty solid for sure. But our next tower is going to make any previous improvements made to look like an absolute joke, as the Ice Monkey failed to round 27 as a tier 1 since it couldn't attack the Bloons at all. But wouldn't you know it, their upgrade on the left path, Snap Freeze, finally allows them to do just that. They're also getting the ability to freeze through 2 layers of regular balloons from their right path upgrade as well, so I'm actually filling a map with them for the very first time. And the Ice Monkeys is tied with several other towers for the smallest in the game, so you're able to get around 360 of them based on how many of the ninjas that I fit. Ultimately, it took me about half an hour to get them all down and upgraded, so I am now very excited to see what this tower can pull off, now that it finally has offensive capabilities. And I figured it would make sense to show you guys how they do through all the standard rounds before free play, since we haven't seen that yet, and just like we would all expect, the Ice Monkeys had absolutely no issue tearing through the super early rounds. And I noticed that the first ceramics on round 40 didn't seem to make it any further than the previous Bloons had, which was interesting to me. And honestly, even the first Moab didn't last very long either. And things continued going smoothly, but once we had to face the first BFB, that quickly started to change. Since the Ice Monkeys are only doing 1 damage per attack, it takes them a while to destroy stronger targets, and this would become extremely apparent once they had to face the first ZOMG on round 85, with it getting halfway through the second loop before even being popped into BFBs. And when I saw just how far the ZOMGs were getting during the early free play rounds, I thought that there was no chance of the Ice Monkeys getting very far. But somehow, round after round, they kept on fighting, and while it wasn't the cleanest gameplay, our Ice Monkey army actually managed to surpass round 100. This definitely shocked me, and honestly, I'm curious to see what the tier 3 and tier 4 towers will be able to pull off, but with that being said, they ultimately failed around 104 on their first try when some Moabs made it too far to get popped in time. And then on the second try, they literally lost in an identical way, which was definitely a bit funny to see, before ultimately failing to this round once again on their third try, this time leaking a much larger army of Moabs. But yeah, needless to say, going from around 27 to 104, I'm not even sure if we should count it, but that's going to be an improvement that I simply think no other tower even has a reasonable chance of contesting. Now the Glue Gunner is quite funny to me, because it also gains the ability to attack regular Bloons with its tier 2 upgrade on the left path, but its glue cannot affect Moabs. So I hope you can understand me not bothering to fill an entire map with this tower, but as you can see, it fails to the first Moab on round 46, since that takes more than 600 lives, even with me having the Bloons Sabotage Monkey knowledge maxed out. But the funny thing is, going from round 27 to 46 is still the second biggest improvement that we've seen thus far. So I guess basically the trick is to be so bad that you end up being good. And now it's time to see what the Buccaneer can do. Although I have to admit, while this tower did improve an incredible amount from tier 0 to 1, I don't expect nearly as much from the second tier. And that's because, while we are getting a range boost from the left path upgrade, on the right, all you get is camo detection, which doesn't even function the same way as it normally would since their specialist building is already giving them camo detection anyways, as you can see on screen. But the range boost they get is pretty significant, and this tower has projectiles that are fast with a decent amount of pierce, so hopefully that will allow them to push even further than before. Of course, it goes without saying, but I'll say it yet again, the early free play rounds were an absolute joke for the tier 2 Buccaneers. In fact, even as they surpassed round 100, the Bloons still weren't making any significant progress. And this was to be expected, considering the tier 1 Bucks got all the way up to round 115. But I will say, I had to experience quite a significant amount of lag, which I guess is coming from all the projectiles on screen, but I definitely don't remember it being anywhere near this bad before. But in any case, I felt like the Buccaneers were definitely struggling more than I would expect as we got past round 110, but I guess the range upgrade really isn't going to be that helpful like I kind of thought. In fact, on their first try, the Bucks actually failed to just round 114, and I wouldn't say it was very close either. To be fair, the second try did see them get past this round, along with 115 as well, but once we hit 116, the RBE got up to 1.4 million, and there was absolutely zero chance of us getting even close to surviving everything that the game had thrown our way. But on the third try, things were a lot different. Not that I made it much further, although we did beat round 116, but then round 117 was just difficult enough for us to barely lose to it, which is always a little sad to see. But what's even more sad is the fact that the Buccaneer only managed to progress by 2 rounds as a tier 2 tower. And I'm also not sure just how much progress the Monkey Ace will be making, considering its right path upgrade is also just camo detection, while the left path upgrade does give their projectiles 8 pierce. So I'm really hoping that they'll be able to actually take advantage of all that extra pierce and get through some extra rounds here. I just gotta say though, it's really funny how I've been skipping to free play in order to avoid repeating the same lines over and over, just for me to end up saying how easy the early free play rounds were over and over during this video. But yeah, I mean, as we surpassed the round 100 mark, the Bloons were still getting destroyed quite easily, which is to be expected given that the tier 1 ace got to round 111 by itself. But as we continued pushing forward, I could tell our tier 2 aces were already starting to really struggle, and on round 112, I really thought they had no chance when I saw how high that the RBE was and just how many Bloons they were facing. And while some ceramics did get super close to the exit, the aces proved me wrong by actually managing to survive. And the next few rounds ended up being a good bit easier as well, allowing the Monkey Ace army to easily tear through them until we got to 116, where again I questioned their ability and was promptly proven wrong once again. However, round 117 was different, as it sent us basically endless ZOMGs at the start, which ended up being more than enough for the ace to get overwhelmed by ceramics this time. And then on the second try, we got another tough round, but our aces did survive a huge leak at first, however, they could not end up getting through the round in the end. And their third try was more of the same, with the ace getting overran by even more ceramics this time, which marks an ultimate improvement of 6 rounds. But luckily for the ace, it looks a whole lot better after getting to go right after the Buccaneer. And the Super Monkey is also going to be really interesting to see, because it was absolutely broken as a tier 1, but part of the reason for that is the fact that the laser vision upgrade actually counts as 2 projectiles in this game, along with it increasing the pierce of the Super Monkey from 1 to 2. So the upgrade effectively 4 times the damage per second of an already strong tower. However, as someone pointed out in my comments, the plasma vision actually only counts as 1 projectile. So is there any chance this tower actually does worse as a tier 2? Well, probably not, considering the right path will significantly increase its already huge range, and the plasma still does have 1 extra pierce along with a higher rate of fire. So with that in mind, let's see what this army of super monkeys can do. Of course, they had no issue with absolutely obliterating the early rounds of free play, and I mean honestly, the early rounds for this tower are the same rounds where other tier 2s would already be failing. But I can honestly say, the plasma really is worse than the laser vision upgrade. You see, the super monkeys were tearing through some really difficult rounds, but keep in mind, a full map of 1-1 super monkeys already got to round 146, and sure enough, the plasma vision only got them 1 single round further, as they got totally overwhelmed by an insane amount of Bloons on round 147. And while their second try had 500,000 less RBE on that round, once the super monkeys had beaten it, they had to face another 1.5 million RBE on round 148, which promptly took them out once again. And on the third try, I really thought they had a chance of progressing at least 1 more round, as the Bloons were a good bit easier, and the super monkeys did get closer, but ultimately ended up getting overran here as well. So that means they only improved by 2 rounds as a tier 2 tower, tying it with the Buccaneer for the worst improvement of this whole video so far. And in this case, it's especially terrible considering how expensive the plasma vision upgrade is. I mean seriously, if you're ever going for a sun god, just get a 1-2 super monkey and don't bother even touching the plasma vision upgrade in between. Now at this point in the game, I didn't realize I was about to be biting off a whole lot more than I was ready to chew. And I know that sounds weird, but let me explain. You see, when I was upgrading our wizard army from tier 1 to 2, I had already just spent 5 hours dealing with the spike factory, which I'll explain when I get to that tower. But because of that setback, it was already midnight at this point, and I was really looking forward to finally moving, well, forward. I figured that the wizard would make some progress with its tier 2 upgrades, as it is getting a lightning bolt attack from its left path, although the right path just gives it camo detection, and beyond that, This tower already made an insane amount of progress from tier 0 to 1, so I figured it probably wouldn't be jumping all that much further. But what I didn't anticipate is that after easily tearing through the early free play rounds, just like any other solid tower, our wizard army was going to begin crashing the game. In fact, it happened for the first time on round 101, so I started the game back up, hoping that was a fluke, but sure enough, it crashed again on just round 109. And normally I wouldn't be so impatient, but with how late it was getting, and the fact that I really wanted to get this video out by the next day for you guys, I figured it made sense to skip to round 130, given that the tier 1s had gotten to round 134 on their own. But then the game started crashing every 2 rounds, first on 131, and then again on 133. So I figured I should finally update my graphics driver, and I know I might sound dumb for not doing that sooner, but the thing is, it's needed to be upgraded for a couple days, and the Spike Factory, despite running so slowly, never crashed once. But 30 minutes and 1 graphics driver later, I finally loaded back into the game, just for it to crash around 135 this time regardless. So yeah, all I can guess is that having the lightning upgrade on every wizard is what causes the game to crash, and if you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments, but I'm honestly just going to come back to the wizard later at this point. And thankfully, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that both the village and farm, even with their tier 2 upgrades, cannot attack the Bloons whatsoever, meaning that they would both fail to just round 27 if I use fast track mode to skip the first 25 rounds. Now I remember the Mortar being a laggy tower, so I'm really hoping that it won't also crash the game, because honestly, now it's already 1:30 AM. But the Mortar's upgrade on the left path does give the tower a larger blast radius, which definitely could make a decent impact, especially considering this tower has a ton of pierce, but the upgrade on the right just sets regular balloons on fire, which could help to clean up the ceramics, but without it being able to affect Moab class balloons, I really don't expect a ton from that. So let's see what our tier 2 mortars can do. Now honestly, I can say for the first time that they weren't really destroying the early free play rounds. I mean, the mortars were surviving, but any ZOMGs that came out looked really difficult to beat. And beyond that, they actually lost to just round 94 for the first time, when the mortars had to face a few large groups of them. And this is pretty crazy considering that the tier 1 mortars had actually gotten to round 95 themselves. And on their second try, they once again got overwhelmed by just round 94. So I honestly thought this tower might do the funniest thing ever and actually perform worse as a tier 2, but alas, on their third try, they did get through round 94 when it was easier, and beyond that, despite what I was expecting, the mortars ended up surviving round 95 as well. But ultimately, as soon as things got a bit more difficult on round 96 again, they got overwhelmed once more, which means that the mortar only managed to improve by a single round. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't expecting a whole lot more from the Dartling gunner, because not only did this tower do quite well as a tier 1, but its left path upgrade is giving a nice boost to the Dartling gunner's already high rate of fire as well. Although to be fair, just like with many towers prior to this one, the right path simply allows it to pop lead balloons. But still, I think we could see a pretty solid improvement from the tier 2 Dartling gunners overall here. And I don't know why, but it's pretty funny to me watching them follow my mouse as I upgrade each tower. Hopefully that's like not just me, but anyways, let's see what the Dartling gunners can pull off. And just like when they were a tier 1, I'm starting off by pointing them all up to the upper left corner, and I'll just let them get as far as possible, probably while laying down at this point, before I start taking over the control myself. You might also remember that ultimately, pointing them up to this area is by far the best thing you can do with the Dartling gunner anyways, as they shoot across the entire map and get to use their whole pierce, while also having all the darts converge in this area where Bloons spend the most time as well. And of course, our Dartling gunner army had no issue getting past the round 100 mark, where it continued pushing forward quite easily. In fact, as we approached the point where they had failed as tier 1 towers, the ZOMGs still weren't surviving all that long. But it didn't take very long for things to start changing, as the Bloons continued getting stronger and faster, and very soon, the Dartling gunners lost without my control to round 125. And when I took over, I did my best to focus on destroying the Bloons in front, while also damaging the ZOMGs behind them, which was allowing me to actually survive the next several rounds, but on 129, I actually bled some lives for messing up a bit, before ultimately getting overran by the Moabs on round 131. And with my second attempt, I felt like I was actually playing pretty well, but the insane amount of balloons that the game threw at us was simply too much to handle. However, our third attempt would see round 131 be a good bit easier, along with a few of the following rounds as well, before something quite annoying happened. I sped up the game for literally 1 second on round 134, and wouldn't you know it, right then, a few ceramics shot out the exit. Of course, I couldn't count that as their third attempt, so I tried once more. However, this time, round 134 was simply too difficult to keep up with, which means that the Dartling gunner will have to settle for a very solid 17 round improvement, along with her tack shooter and ninja monkey from earlier. Now you'll probably remember this from the last video, but the Spike Factory is a pretty weird tower. However, the tier 2 upgrades are quite straightforward. Unfortunately, the left path simply allows their spike piles to pop lead balloons, but the right path will further increase the rate at which it can produce those spikes. Now I wish the game would give you a specific number as to how much it increases that rate by, but I'm honestly not expecting this tower to have a huge jump compared to when it was a tier 1. And before we can find out, first we have to deal with, well, this. An incredible amount of lag due to the amount of spikes that are constantly on the track once a round has been going on long enough. And I made a pretty big mistake as well. You see, I figured I would take a walk while this tower was going, knowing it was going to take forever, but I totally forgot about the fact that on round 50, this little window pops up. So for like an hour and a half, the game sat like this, which was a real shame because when I finally did get back and fix things, it ended up taking an incredible amount of time for the Spike Factory to progress through free play. In fact, this is not an exaggeration at all. They literally took 2 hours just to go from round 86 up to 105. And this is exactly how I ended up starting on the wizard at midnight. And it always feels worse when your own silly mistake is what cost you. Like, at least when the game was crashing with the wizard, that was kind of inevitable and I didn't feel so bad about it, but this was just ridiculous. And if you're still watching the video without dropping a like and sub, I mean seriously, I don't know what else I can do to earn it. But by the time this tower finally failed for the first time on round 113, it had now been nearly 3 hours, and needless to say, I was honestly preying on its downfall at this point. And I didn't even notice this until looking at the footage, but apparently their second and third try took another half an hour on their own. Absolutely ridiculous. And this is especially funny because on their second try, round 113 looked quite difficult as the game sent out a bunch of ZOMGs our way, and sure enough, the Spike Factories were not able to survive here. But on their third attempt, despite my best wishes, the Spike Factories did manage to push through on round 113 before getting really lucky with a lower RB on 114, but finally, they lost to round 115 on their third and final attempt, marking a 9-round improvement. And normally I would consider that decent, but honestly, after what this tower has put me through, I'm genuinely grateful that it didn't improve any further. But this next tower is one that I've been looking forward to a lot more, as the helicopter doesn't actually gain any sort of boost to its attack or range or anything like that, but instead, the left path tier 2 upgrade unlocks pursuit mode targeting, while the right path simply allows them to pop camo balloons. So this will be a really interesting chance to see if pursuit mode itself is actually better or worse than having a person control the helicopters with their mouse. But getting them all switched over was easier said than done, with the helicopters constantly following my every move and blocking me from seeing exactly which tower I was clicking on. But pretty soon I had them all switched over, so let's see just how the tier 2 helicopters perform. Of course, the early rounds of free play were going down with absolutely no issues, which is to be expected given that the tier 1 helicopters had gotten all the way up to round 116 when I was in control of them. And as we surpassed round 100, the helis were still doing a good job of keeping all the balloons contained to the upper left corner of the map. But naturally, as we pushed our way closer and closer to where they had failed before, the AI that controls pursuit began to struggle, not always knowing when to go for the ceramics that were about to leak versus the larger balloons behind them. This actually led to it leaking a couple balloons on round 108, but thankfully, the helis had a nice save before totally losing. However, it was clear that they weren't going to be getting all that much further, and sure enough, the helicopter ended up failing for the first time on just round 111, where they could have easily stopped the ceramics from escaping. Now on their second try, the helicopters seemed to play better, and were able to get through round 111 this time, along with 112 as well. However, when they got up to round 113, the ceramics ended up overwhelming the heli's firepower, which I think was a more respectable way for them to lose at least. And on the third attempt, once again the helicopters were able to get through 2 more rounds, however 115 had them facing just under 1.5 million RBE, and honestly I wasn't expecting them to beat it, but again the way that they lost was just so embarrassing. And this means that pursuit mode actually made the helicopter get 1 round lower as a tier 2, although I'm going to count it as a 0 round improvement since I could have easily still controlled them myself and this wouldn't have happened. And it feels good to say that we're really in the home stretch now. But with the engineer, I'm honestly not sure if we should expect to see it improve much, because the left path upgrade, which is supposed to allow it to produce more sentries, actually gets overridden by the fact that their specialist building gives them super sentries, so they actually will not be producing any more sentries as a tier 2 than they did as a tier 1. Now the right path upgrade does make the engineer's range substantially larger, but as we've seen with some previous towers, a range upgrade alone isn't enough to necessarily make the difference. But in any case, I am definitely curious to see what ends up happening here. Although, seeing it might be wishful thinking, because with all the sentries that our engineers are producing, I really can't tell all that much of what is actually going on the map. But it is pretty clear that as we pass round 100, the engineers still really aren't breaking a sweat. Of course, I had expected this though, with them actually being the third best performing tier 1 tower during our last video. And naturally, as we continued pushing deeper into free play, the Bloons still were struggling to make any real progress. But in this game, no matter how much defense you have, the Bloons will eventually win. And sure enough, on round 127, the engineers just barely lost to this cluster of them. And the interesting thing is that round 127 is exactly how far this tower got as a tier 1 as well. But at least on their second try, the tier 2 NGs were able to push a little further. And on round 130, they really did fight their hearts out to fend off all the ceramics that kept on trying to escape, but in the end, the Bloons were simply too much to handle. And I thought on our final attempt, the exact same thing was about to happen, but this time around, the engineers actually clutched up and only lost about 100 lives. And this ended up being the difference maker that allowed them to actually beat 130 now. But when I saw how high the RBE was on 131, I thought surely this is it, until I was proven wrong, as the engineers managed to fight their way through it. I also found a couple engineers that hadn't been upgraded from tier 1 to 2, so I took care of those while round 132 was playing out, but ultimately, our defense ended up getting overran here, which means the engineer improved by just 5 rounds. Once again proving that range upgrades on their own really aren't all that valuable. Unless we're talking about the submarine, of course. You see, its left path upgrade is a bit more than just some extra range, as advanced intel actually allows the submarine to attack balloons that are within the range of any tower on the map. And when you're talking about an entire map filled with towers, that's the same as every submarine having global range. But somehow, that might not even be the best of it, as the right path upgrade allows the sub's main projectile to split into 3 darts, which then gets turned into 4 because of its specialist building. Now keep in mind that the tier 1 submarine had only gotten to round 94 as well, so I can only really begin to imagine how big this improvement is actually going to be. But as you can see, this tower is similar to the buccaneer, not just because they both have to be placed on water, but also in the sheer amount of lag that all their projectiles create. And the submarine might even be worse because every single tower is constantly firing no matter what. But it's definitely worth dealing with, as the submarines easily cruise past the round 100 mark, which I normally say is to be expected, but like I mentioned a second ago, the tier 1 sub only got to round 94 in the first place. So, as the tier 2s kept on pushing further and further, every additional round they get is really just gravy at this point. And I just gotta say, what a crazy ride this has been so far. Starting with the 0-0 towers back in December, and it really means so much to me that there are so many people out there who have followed the journey with me. Now ultimately, the submarine army got up to around 124 on their first try, where the RBE had an astounding 1.74 million, and the Bloons simply crushed our defense. But this was a bit of a fluke, which was proven by the fact that the subs then went on to improve by a full 5 rounds with their second attempt, and when they did lose to 129, it was a little bit closer at least. And on their third attempt, the submarines fought really vigilantly, doing their best to survive the onslaught that the game was throwing at us on round 131. However, the Bloons ultimately ended up prevailing and pushing through to the exit. But this marks an incredible 37 round improvement, which only the Ice Monkey can beat on a technicality. Oh, and as far as the Bloonchipper goes, this tower's tier 2 upgrades finally allow it to attack lead balloons for the first time. However, they still cannot affect Moabs, so this tower would have failed the same way that the Glue Gunner did on round 46, but the difference is, it only gets a 9 round improvement. Now, I bet you thought I forgot about these guys, and honestly, I wish that I had. But we're just gonna pick up where we left off with the Wizard Monkey before, and if the game is still crashing every 2 rounds, I guess that's just something I'll have to live with. Now at first, I did have a bit of hope when it seemed like that things were actually going alright, but then the Wizard quickly proceeded to crash to just round 138, and I honestly wonder if it was getting close to losing there as well. And wouldn't you know it, without fail, they crashed again exactly 2 rounds later, and then of course, exactly 2 rounds after that. but I can definitely tell that the wizard is getting close to losing now, at least for sure. Although it was very concerning to me when our next attempt saw the game crashing after just one round this time, because like if we got much further, the game would literally crash before the wizards could even get through a single round. So I was pretty thankful when they actually ended up getting overran by the Moabs on round 143 once I had tried again. And I'm sorry, but this tower is not getting 3 attempts, cause like it already cheated by crashing the game and getting extra attempts that way. And here are the final results. The number in parentheses is how much the tower improved from its tier 1 to 2. And as you can see, our super monkey did so well in the last video that despite only improving 2 rounds here, it's still at the top. Although the wizard got quite close, and this time we have a few other towers that snuck their way past the round 130 mark as well. And our award for the most improved tower has to be shared by the ice monkey and the submarine, I'd say, with the helicopter being the only tower that can technically perform worse by using a more upgraded version of it. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also want to know which towers can beat Mastery and Poppable all by themselves as well.